Laura Matter is the program manager for natural yard care for the Tilth Alliance, a longtime Seattle, what would you call it, agricultural nonprofit organization?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Tell us, for those who don't know what Tilth is about, tell us what you do and a little bit about your history.
For me personally,
No, for Tilth.
for Tilth. So Tilth Alliance has been around for many years. We are currently a conglomeration of three different nonprofits that merged about 3 years ago, from Seattle Tilth, Tilth Producers of Washington, the Cascade Harvest Coalition. And we were all in the same building out at the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford, doing similar things, but sort of approaching different groups of people. Seattle Tilth worked with residents, basically consumer facing, working with people, teaching them backyard gardening. Tilth Producers supported farmers in Washington State. And then Cascade Harvest was kind of the tie-in between farming and consumer. So we've merged all those together. And we still do all of those kinds of programming, sponsor the farm guide for people to find fresh food, support farmers markets, support farmers in Washington, support backyard gardeners, urban farmers. We have a lot of work we're doing with groups around the city, helping to support good nutrition, supplying good food bags to people. We have a huge community education presence. And then the Garden Hotline program, which I manage, is a free service for people to call if they have questions.
Tilth also is involved in the urban farm. To my knowledge, the only farm in the city of Seattle in Rainier Beach, right on the water. Tell us about that.
So the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands is down in Rainier Beach, makes a chain of parks between Beersheba Park, which is across the street from Rainier Beach High School. You can walk from there through the farm, wetland park that used to be an old city light nursery, and the farm that we're managing with the Friends of Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands is old Parks Department nursery site. So you walk through there, go through the other site, and then you can go all the way over to Pritchard Beach Park. It's on where the Pritchard Island Peninsula is, and that area used to be underwater. So a long time ago it was underwater, and then of course that was Duwamish land, which we acknowledge that we are on and working on, and it is currently being used as a classroom, essentially outside classroom, for people to come learn about organic gardening and farming and wetland restoration, because we're right at the edge of the lake.
And now that we are in a shelter-in-place situation as decreed by the governor, what is the urban farm doing? One can still go there as long as it's open and you're maintaining a 6-foot social distancing, yes?
Well, I'm not sure, to be honest. We're still grappling with that a little bit, because we are public space. It is public park property. And so our goal is to keep it open for people to walk through. We do have programming going on there still, in the sense that there are still individuals who are maintaining the fields that we're planting and the gardens. And then also we have a lot of plant starts that we've started, both to plant out there, and we give a lot of those away in general. So we're trying to figure out what the best approach is to that, because we also have a lot of things that are vulnerable to vandalism, and that if we leave it open all the time and nobody's on site, then we're worried about that a little bit. But the goal is, yes, to keep it open so people can stroll through there eventually.
What is your background in agriculture and gardening?
My background, I've been a longtime horticulturist in the Northwest. Studied landscape architecture at South Seattle College, and then got a degree in botany at the University of Washington. And I have worked in the field doing my own landscaping. I've worked doing interior plant maintenance. I've done work with Swanson's Nursery at the info desk there. And I've worked with Tilth for about 12 and a half years now as an educator. So a long time working with plants and gardening, teaching people about all kinds of gardening, not just edible gardening.
So Tilth runs the Garden Hotline, and even though we are under a shelter-in-place situation. The Garden Hotline continues to operate Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5. Tell us about that.
We do. See, I'm in my own space here, talking to people. Each of us is working from home. We have one staff member who is going into the office. We're maintaining only like 4 people in the office at a time. And basically there's usually only 2 people there, including one of our Garden Hotline educators. And she's only there a few days a week. Most of the time we're working remotely. We can answer phone calls by picking up voicemails and then calling people back. And then we're also answering emails remotely. So we have the capability of that. So we're still staffed the same way we would be Monday through Friday.
What kind of calls are you getting?
We're getting a lot of food gardening. As you can imagine, it's become a concern for people. Partly, I think people are at home and they find time now to do some gardening. But the other thing is, I think people are thinking about their health a lot. And so they're thinking about growing their own food a little bit more than we've seen in the past. I'd say another time that I saw sort of this surge in food gardening was after Michelle Obama planted her garden at the White House. We actually started to see a rise in calls about that topic. So we still get calls about other things, like about general yard care and moss in the lawn and moles and those typical springtime things, but more food gardening right now.
What's the weirdest call you've gotten?
Oh boy. Oh man. I would have to think about that. There's been a lot of odd calls. One of the most interesting calls we've gotten was a woman in China who was farming there, but had lived in the Northwest and knew about us, decided to call us from across the world to get some advice about what she was doing. And then we've had calls from people in like North Carolina whose neighbors spread a bunch of manure on their property, acres and acres of property, and it was choking them out of their house and home from the fragrance. And so we tried to help them figure out who they would call in North Carolina to register that kind of complaint. That was unusual for us, I think. We get calls from people in Florida who want to know, how to work with tropical things that we're not as familiar with. So we have to do a little research to help them out. But basically we're a King County program, so we focus on the Northwest.
30 years ago, when I was doing public affairs interview programs, I talked to people like Mark Music and
Yes.
Tom Forster. And they were saying things like, put a face on your food. And now that we have this pandemic, it's not as critical because we can find just about everything we need except for frozen pizza and toilet paper at PCC, right?
Right.
But were there to be, let's say, an earthquake, just for example, closing the I-5 freezerway was another phrase that they use. We would not be able to import our frozen pizza or our rutabagas from California anymore, and we would have to depend on local farmers. And this is where local gardens become a lot more interesting. And of course, we think about the victory gardens during World War II. So what do you think would be the most positive outcome from this COVID-19 pandemic in terms of people's health and growing their own food and reconnecting to putting a face on your food, to put it very quickly?
Yeah, I think they said that well. I think the positive outcome is that people are looking more locally that maybe never had thought about it much before. This area is pretty well versed on that. That's why we have PCC and Central Co-op and different businesses that, are promoting and supporting local farmers. Tilth that is what we do. We support the local growers down to you in your backyard. And I think there are people thinking about this now that hadn't thought about it as much before, so that's a good thing. We hope to be able to continue to support people so it isn't just something they do out of fear and panic, but they do it because they realize it's a good thing to continue to do. So I think longevity wise, I think we'll see more people paying attention to local jurisdictions and what's going on with them. Farmers market issue is an example of that. Local farmers markets were shut down, not so much just because people were worried about a crowd, which is, of course, a concern and part of it, but because of the way they are permitted, because they are temporary events. And so they're not a grocery store. They don't have a storefront, and they weren't factored into the group of people who were allowed to stay open. So there are discussions about that happening right now. So those kinds of changes also will be important to think about how we have set up our infrastructure for food locally to enable it to continue to be there for people. There's a lot of local farms in Washington. There's a lot of food grown here. If you go to any farmer's market, you're buying food that's coming from not very far away. So it's there, and then people can grow in their own yards and be successful. That's what we're here for, to help with that.
It's almost a rite of passage to have to grow your own kale here, isn't it?
Yes. Kale is it. That's the one. I know I always think of kale when I think of people growing food. It's one of the first things they try.
They become like these totems where you break off the lower branches, and they're almost like totem poles. When you were talking about grocery stores, you mentioned PCC, as I did. You mentioned Central Co-op. You didn't mention places like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. And Whole Foods, now that it's been subsumed by Amazon, essentially is local. But do they, even though they have an association with a organic sensibility in produce, they don't have the local component? Is there a difference?
I think there is a difference. I think the PCC and Central Co-op were built on that premise that they would, do things locally. Whole Foods wasn't local to begin with. It was a Texas chain, and I think they still try to buy food locally, but their volume might be a little different than PCC and Central Co-op is, perhaps. They do a lot of organic foods, for sure, but they're not necessarily local. But I do know that they have a focus on that. I mean, even QFC and Safeway show you when they have local foods. And that's been a change, in the last 5 years or so, that people are, even in the regular big chain grocery stores, that you're finding local food.
How are the master composter sustainability stewards able to continue doing their work while staying an appropriate distance away from folks who want to learn?
Right, so they're kind of doing what the hotline's doing. We're reaching out to people in different ways where they're not physically present. They're helping the hotline right now start some plants so that we can give them away. Our goal with the gardens that we work with, the hotline does a lot of outreach directly with people in community garden settings. We work with immigrant and refugee populations, low-income housing, some of the Lehigh villages, homeless shelters. So because we can't be there, we're growing plants to give to them. And some of the master composters are helping us with that. They're starting seeds at home in flats that they can drop off for us or we can pick up, and then we will go deliver them to the gardens. And so these are ways we can do things safely where we don't have to be in contact with people directly, but supply them with things they need. We're looking into building some slug trap kits to drop off for people, just using old containers. If we can find the yeast. Yeast is not to be found because everybody, I guess, thinks they're baking bread right now. So there's no flour and yeast out there. But if we can find the yeast, we just need the little containers and a little education sheet about how to do it. Yeast and water in a little container in the ground will help to trap your slugs. So they're helping us with things like that. They're helping us translate some things. So for the gardens where we work with people who don't speak English, we have a planting calendar that's pretty visual, but there is a key at the bottom that tells you what those symbols mean. And we've translated that into Vietnamese and Russian so far, with 2 of the master composters helping us.
Is the beer method considered valid for dealing with slugs?
Oh, absolutely. Works like a charm. If you have a plant, for instance, a dahlia that's trying to grow, you place one of those right at the base of it, and you will get your dahlia up without the slugs continuing to chomp it off. If you have a row of lettuce, you may need to place a few of them in the garden, but it works really well. They're attracted to the smell of the yeast. And you can use beer, of course, for this, but yeast is simpler and more direct. You don't have to go keep buying cheap beer at the grocery store and keep making those trips to the grocery store right now. So beer, what they're attracted to in the beer is the yeast as well.
Well, at least the beer gives them a happy ending.
It does.
So you have a thriving YouTube channel for those who just want to poke around and maybe search for the answer to their questions. How do we find that?
So it's just, if you search Garden Hotline on YouTube, it'll pop up. It's we've got educational videos. Some of them are kind of funny little storytelling ones we've done. Some of them are pretty straightforward. The most recent one we did, we put together last year, is about cover crops. And it shows both what you do in the fall and what you do in the spring with cover crops, how to turn them in. So it's timely in that sense. People are doing that right now, turning their cover crops in, so you can learn how you do that and best methods and when and timing on all of that.
Well, I'm very grateful for the work that you do and the work that Tilth does. When I think of Tilth, when I go to the Good Shepherd Center, I think of Tilth as being a quintessentially Seattle or Cascadia kind of organization. And it makes me feel good about living here. So thank you for your work.
You're very welcome. I just want to point out that, we do a plant sale in May, early May. We can't hold that, of course, on the site. We usually do that at the Good Shepherd Center, but that's going to an online sale and pickup. So that people can get their plants. Because I know right now people are selling out of plants. So we have lots of plants coming in early May that people can order online. They will be picked up at the Rainier Beach farm. And we will do that, casually, people coming through and picking up and controlling crowds there. And so nobody can get out and walk around the site, but at least they can see the place. So that'll be great. We can introduce that site to other people.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.